Hello, viewers. This is Steve Burley from Studio Burley, and we're here again live with Janice Fiamengo. I've got my patriarchal hat on, my patriarchal scotch at the ready, and of course, the all-important patriarchal cigars in case of emergencies and we need to blow the head off of a feminist by lighting one of these up. With no further ado, Janice is here to talk about the feminism's double standards, of which there are an infinite.
Hello,
Hi, Janice.
Steve. How are you doing?
Pretty good, thanks.
Good. I don't have any patriarchal props, unfortunately. I forgot my patriarchal ginger ale.
Oh, damn. That must be a conspiracy of the patriarchy holding you down as a woman.
Probably, yeah.
You've been found out. You've been
I'll
outed.
be parched, yeah.
You've been outed. What do they call it? Doxing. Doxing.
Yes.
There's a woman out there cooperating with the patriarchy. No more ginger ale for her.
Yeah, so what should we talk about? A lot of, obviously, a million specific examples that one could pull out of that video, and they're all really interesting. I used a lot of articles, clips that I'd been saving up over the last year or so, and then I just kind of tried to make a narrative out of all of them. And there's so many things to talk about, but one thing that I thought maybe we could talk about was the really interesting case of Nicole Ryan Doucette.
Right.
This is a woman who, and of course, you know, I realize you can't make too much. You can't generalize too greatly from one specific case. There are many cases one can find where, you know, the law goes awry, justice is not done. But this particular case, I think, is such an interesting example of gynocentrism in action, and it's absolutely unimaginable if the sex of the offender in this case were reversed. And this is a Canadian case of a woman back about 10 years ago. I think it was 2008, 2009, although I'm not 100% sure about that. Her name was Nicole Ryan Doucette, and she tried to have her husband killed. It seems from all the evidence that we have now at the end of the whole thing was that she simply was tired of him and she wanted his money. He was worth about $1 million. He was a Canadian soldier. She wanted his pension, and they were in the process of divorcing. So her chances to have access to his money were running out. So she decided to hire somebody to kill him. She tried to hire one guy. Apparently she paid him some thousands of dollars and he just went off with the money and never killed her husband. So then she hired a second guy, not realizing that this guy was an RCMP officer. And he recorded their conversation in which she agreed that she would pay him $25,000 if he would murder her husband. He asked her on the recording if the husband had been abusive, you know, why it was. Basically, she wanted to get rid of him. She never said anything about abuse. And she was then arrested shortly after that. But then at trial, suddenly the whole story changed. And she said that she had been tortured during the years that she had lived with this man, that she feared for her life. She feared for her daughter's life. She claimed that he had done things like shoved her up against the wall and held a gun to her head and threatened to blow her head off, you know, all sorts of horrific things. It sounds to me, and not that I'm a legal expert of any sort, but it sounds like the prosecution kind of bungled the case because they ended up never putting the husband on the stand to refute any of these charges. And I guess that looked suspicious to the judge, and the judge believed Ms. Ryan's story and acquitted her. The Crown then appealed that acquittal all the way up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court found that though, if I'm understanding and remembering correctly what they said, the Supreme Court found that indeed the defense that she had used, which was a defense of duress, you know, she had to kill him because she felt she had no other options. She claimed she'd called the RCMP countless times. They'd failed to help her. You know, she was at her wit's end. She was terrified that this man was going to kill her. The Supreme Court found that was improperly, the defense was improperly used. But they said that she should not be retried because she'd already suffered enough. She'd suffered this terrible experience. At the same time, or shortly after, the Supreme Court was rendering its decision, in which it blamed the RCMP for failing this woman and expressed a lot of sympathy for the horrible things she'd endured. At the same time, there was an external investigation into the actions of the RCMP that found that, in fact, they hadn't failed her at all, because she hadn't contacted them very often. She had contacted the RCMP at least once to claim that her husband had threatened to burn the house down with her and her daughter in it. The RCMP arrested the husband, investigated, and found that there wasn't anything to her claim. Other than that, she was never in a hospital with injuries. There was absolutely no evidence that the husband had been abusive, and it seems as if he simply wasn't. She just wanted to kill him, and the easiest defense, once she was caught trying to have him killed, was to say that she'd been abused. And this is the kind of culture that we live in, that she was believed by the Supreme Court justices. And so her husband not only had the grueling experience of having his ex-wife or woman in the process of becoming his ex try to have him killed, but had to also have his name besmirched in this way as an abuser.
Yeah, I mean, I remember that case quite clearly. And Michael Ryan, I spoke to him several times, and at one point he was willing to. I didn't know
that. Yeah, when was that you spoke to him?
It was right around the time where the Supreme Court ruled that they'd stay the prosecution. And it's not just any stay of prosecution. It's a permanent stay of prosecution. Right. They're not allowed to re-prosecute this thing. So although she's not acquitted, there's a legitimate case that the RCMP considered watertight, that they're not allowed to prosecute because she's a woman. Now, keep in mind, the Supreme Court was influenced heavily and has heard from, I don't know how heavily, obviously I can't say that heavily, but to me it looks like she was influenced by Elizabeth Sheehy, who wrote that book, Battered Women's Syndrome. I think she might have coined the term. Is that right, Janice?
I don't think she coined the term, but I'm not sure. I don't think so. I think the term was already in existence, but certainly, yes, Sheehy has been a central proponent of the idea that women should not be held responsible. They should never be tried for first-degree murder or even second-degree murder, even in cases where they have clearly planned the murder of their intimate partners, but that as long as they can make the claim that they were acting under duress, that the highest charge should be manslaughter, and even that, she sees that what they're doing is acting in self-defense, and that was certainly what Nicole Ryan claimed.
He has advised the Supreme Court before, if I'm not mistaken. I think she's been a witness to the Supreme Court on this issue, I think.
I wouldn't be surprised. I don't know, though.
It seems to me when I was looking into this, at the time I was looking, I was talking to Michael Ryan, that I started looking into the background of Sheehy and that. And she has, if I remember, I'm going on memory, and this is quite a few years ago this case came out. Let me just take a look at that article here. When was this written? So, where did I put the date? 2013.
2013. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So it's quite a while ago. I can't swear on my memory, but I seem to remember she was. She's known to the Supreme Court, and her work is known to the Supreme Court. So that's. I mean. They're aware of her argument, and they seem to use that argument. I don't know if they referred to Sheehy in their decision.
I haven't read the actual judgment. I just read about the judgment, but I wouldn't be surprised at all. And certainly the idea that women, killing abusive partners shouldn't be held responsible in law, that this should be seen as a form of self-defense, even if, as Sheehy argues, even if it's not in the moment. Obviously, that would be a case of self-defense, if it would be a defense if the woman was being attacked or something like that. But Sheehy argues that even if the man is asleep and he's killed, or in the case of Nicole Ryan, they weren't even living together. They were separated. So how she could claim that, she was under duress in that moment? Well, he makes the case that this is what battered women have to deal with. They're terrified every moment of their lives. And one can imagine cases where that would be true. It just wasn't true at all in this case. And so the poor man, had to go through that, and then to have his name associated really for the rest of his life, because his name's never been cleared, to be associated with a vile form of abuse to such an extent that supposedly he drove his ex-wife to feel that her only option was to have him killed. It's pretty horrible. And I know that he did appear, I saw him, he was interviewed on Michael Coren's old show, fairly briefly, defending himself and saying that he had never abused his wife. And, this was just a fabrication. In fact, she was the one that was abusive. It's known that her sister reported to the RCMP that Nicole tried to run over her in her car. And other family members also reported Nicole's, volatile nature and abusive actions. So this was a very scary, but obviously convincing, manipulative woman. But I didn't know that you had actually spoken to him about maybe interviewing him and doing something on his case.
Yeah, and this brings up an awkward observation for me, anyways. And I've noticed this sufficient enough times to say that it's a significant pattern. He eventually declined to. I can understand why. He doesn't want to be dragged into publicity again and subjected to more scrutiny and more negativity. And that's what happens to men whenever they complain about anything. If a man complains, you generally have two problems instead of one. If a man complains about any given problem, I think men generally learn to put it out of their minds and not deal with it and not talk about it, not complain about it, which leaves the culture with the impression that women have all these millions of problems just dumped on their heads and men have none. And I'll give you an example. Like, he decided to back out of the whole process of talking about his case. But it's not just him. I've approached several different men who have been treated badly in family court or with criminal involvement and different false criminal charges involved or just terrible marriages. And when it comes right down to it, they will not talk about it. It's very, very consistent.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
The only guys that I've been able to convince to talk about it is guys that are at the end of the rope and they really have no other possibility. The guys other men who seem to be rebuilding their lives in a tiny little way, they're just holding on to that little bit of rebuilt life that they've got, and they don't want to risk that.
It's interesting, isn't it? I mean, and that's admirable in many ways. That's a part of men's resilience. It's one of the qualities about men that are very attractive, that men do have that kind of resilience. If they have anything left that they can work for, they'll be willing to do it. And if that means totally blocking out the reality of the abuse they've suffered or the tragedy they've experienced or whatever it happens to be, they'll do it. But in a way, it doesn't work in men's best interests generally, because then it does mean that we go on thinking that men don't suffer, and that women are the suffering sex. And yeah, I mean, I remember being interviewed about a year ago about, sexual harassment in the workplace, that perennial subject. And the woman who was interviewing me was obviously a feminist, and I forget how it came up, but I said, men are sexually harassed by women too. I've spoken to many men, including you. You've told me about things that, happened to you in the workplace.
Quite a few, actually. There've been quite a few
really overt, completely inappropriate things that women do to men all the time. And I mentioned this to the woman. She absolutely didn't believe me. I don't think anyone had ever said this to me before, or to her before. And she said, and so there was this sort of pause where she was trying to figure out whether I was lying to her. And I gave some examples, and she said, well, it's up to the men then, isn't it? It's on the men to report these things. And I said, yeah, but most men just aren't interested in, they're not like, it's different for men. They just don't want to deal with it.
I'd just like to interject something. I think men learn at a very early age that if you complain, you're going to get a second problem. It'll be worse. You won't be helped. You'll be told you'll be told to fix it yourself. Mm-hmm. You'll be maybe given another task on top of the one that was the issue that was bothering you, mm-hmm. or you'll be insulted. You'll be ridiculed. So I think men pretty early on in life learn that, don't complain no matter what. It's just going to make things 10 times worse.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we've seen that, when men are in trouble, or when men are in pain or uncomfortable about something, most people look away. Or if they do look at the man and pay attention to what he's going through, what the response tends to be is a response of contempt. Whereas if a woman is complaining about something or really angry about something, we tend to take her seriously and we want to help. And the response is a response of compassion. And so, that's the way it is. And men internalize that pretty quickly. And so they don't articulate their grievances. And as you found, even if there is a legitimate reason to do so and maybe a useful purpose in doing so, men don't want to. Whereas women know that complaining often is the route to power, or at least a lot of public sympathy.
Well, feminists themselves unknowingly sum it up. When they come up with this conclusion that I don't know how many times I've heard it, more needs to be done for women. Mm-hmm. Well, who is the one to do those things if not women? It's men. So more needs to be, they're not completing the sentence. The sentence should read, the real sentence, more needs to be done for women by men.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Even at the same time as they say that, women don't need men's help. Women don't need men for anything. Women are strong, autonomous beings. But at the same time, they're always very quick to allege that men, and that's one of the things that was emphasized over and over in the video, that women feel perfectly entitled to publish lists of things that men must do in order to better understand women, to be better.
That was a good part of the video. I like that.
It's you see them all the time. The arrogance of it, the mm-hmm. sense of entitlement is astounding. These are by the same people who claim that men are entitled, and yet men could never get away and wouldn't even be interested in trying to get away with publishing lists of things that women should do to serve men or to be allies to men or to help men out or whatever. Yeah, it's astounding. And yet, no matter how often men then try to do the various things they're told they must do, they're also told at the same time that they can't possibly understand women. They can't possibly understand women's experience. And therefore, they have to be silent in any discussions about male-female mm-hmm. relations or anything to do with gender inequality or whatever. Yeah, the circle just goes round and round and round. And which brings me to, go ahead.
Doesn't it start like basically as babies? Like by the age of about 4 or 5, parents, and I did this, I have to say, I did the same thing. If my son was crying about something I didn't think he was hurt, I would insist that he kind of fix it himself, or at least try to first before I would do anything for him. I don't remember what age that started off. Maybe it was 6, maybe it was 4. I don't know, but it kind of crept in there and it felt natural to me. And I don't know if I would have done that with a daughter or not. I probably would have. It's maybe my mentality. But generally, young girls, if they cry about anything, the first thing that happens is they get picked up, soothed, and told, basically given the message that they will be cared for, that their problem will be fixed for them.
Mm-hmm.
And that continues through life, all the way through life. They have that expectation, and it's a realistic expectation.
It's a realistic expectation. It's affirmed. Yeah. I mean, Tom Golden told me about a study, and I don't know the exact details of it, where they have with very young children, like toddlers, maybe even infants. I think they're toddlers, and they're separated from their mother. Don't know exactly how the study is carried out, but the boys, do all sorts of things, very active things, to try to get their mother's attention or to get at their mother. Whereas the girls just start crying immediately. Yeah. And that's what, I suppose there may be some social conditioning involved there, but I suspect there's some deeper kind of biological bedrock too. And that carries all throughout our society. And so women now have this wonderful double standard where they can claim that they want equality when it comes to all the good things in life, but they can also claim that they shouldn't be equally treated, that they need all sorts of special inducements and encouragements and perquisites and all sorts of helps in order to help them to get to equality, which apparently they're constantly being denied by the patriarchy. And it is really quite something. And we started with the example of Big Red screaming out all of her claims that everything that men's rights advocates talk about is really the fault of the patriarchy, and that feminists supposedly care about all of those things just as much as men's advocates do. She's allowed to vent her fury, and men have to listen quietly. Otherwise, they'd be seen as threatening her in some way, whereas she doesn't have to moderate her voice. She doesn't have to moderate her language or anything like that. And you can't even go onto the Queen's University campus to attend a feminist talk because you're recognized as a non-ally. You're recognized as an opponent of feminism, and therefore can be escorted off the campus. I mean, that's pretty astounding.
What's astounding is that the security didn't need anything but the marching orders from the feminist students. And I was a student at the time. I was registered at Queen's at the time, but it didn't occur to me to make that point. So that's my fault. I should have said, hey, I'm a student here, just like every one of them. And this is open to students. It's actually open to the public.
Well, it's open to the public, of course. And that's simply, it's unimaginable if it was a woman wanting to.
It would be national news. It would be national news.
It would absolutely be. And the university would apologize. They would have to answer for why this woman was marched away from a
Probably get a big settlement too.
Could she probably could sue the university. It's just so clear, the double standards. And in that case, I mean, they were claiming it was because they were worried you were going to film, but you promised you wouldn't film. And so you weren't even allowed to attend a public event simply because you'd been identified as somebody they didn't want there. I mean,
and the point is that it's not even that I was identified with what I was doing. All the feminists had to do is say, to get the old white guy. What do they call me? I forget now. They in their Facebook chat, that old white dude.
Yeah.
I mean, it's sexist, it's bigoted, it's racist, and it's ageist. It's everything, right? Wrapped right in there. Everything they say that they're fighting against, they're doing right there on video.
And yet drawing people's attention.
And enforced.
Enforced, yes. And if you'd complained about it, you would have got absolutely nowhere. Nobody would have been annoyed or worried on your behalf or anything like that. I mean, it really is. It is amazing. And I wanted to talk about
recognize and thank Mad Flamingo for a generous donation right there. And
great name, Mad Flamingo. I think that would do for me too.
Mad Fiamengo.
Yeah.
But he's making a point here, which is a very serious point. I don't think anybody really knows what to do. And I feel hopeless about this stuff a lot myself. I mean, we talk about it, and we bring up and you create a lot of well-researched videos, and it seems really obvious what's going on with feminism, and yet this disease marches forward like a cancer.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I've said this before, that I'm pessimistic in the short term. I think I'm optimistic in the long term that, all evil regimes eventually destroy themselves. They're cancer, and they destroy from within. They destroy the host, unfortunately, as well.
Yes.
But they do run their course, and I don't think there is any kind of cure on the horizon for feminism. They have the power. They've seized the reins of power throughout the first world.
Yeah. Well, Soviet communism, destroyed societies across Eastern Europe for how many years? 70 years plus. And many of those societies are still not healthy as a result of the legacy of totalitarianism. And what we are experiencing is a very different thing. It is a totalitarianism, certainly, but it's one that we assent to in many ways. Not every one of us, of course, but many of our fellow citizens enthusiastically assent to and vote for and promote, both men and women, of course. And yeah, it is. I really feel for everybody who experiences that sense of hopelessness and despair. And people often say that to me, it's time to do something about this. Stop talking about it. What's the point of talking? Everybody already agrees, or at least the people who are watching our videos. But I don't know what to do. I don't,
Yeah, here's a comment here that from Flownet07. And we've talked about this before, I think, close down the gender studies faculties. And I really agree with this. This is a very important thing to do. Sorry?
Yeah. Well, how? I absolutely agree. If we could
Well, they did it in Hungary, I think.
Yeah. Viktor Orban has done it in Hungary. He's getting a lot of blowback. It's going to take some balls. And this goes back to a comment I think I mentioned in a previous live stream, that feminism has its power, because men have not said no to women. Absolutely, that's why. Yeah.
I think this is there's an equivalent, a mirror failure in men that's accounted for in the growth of feminism. That a men's traditional role in communities, I think, was to be a boundary setter, like in a family. The father sets boundaries, and setting of boundaries, of course, presuming that they're healthy boundaries, is protective. But no man, or no men, no group of men, no politicians ever said no to a feminist, as far as I know. Nobody with power. And partly because they want to be elected. Once the vote for women came in, they were the majority, then
Yeah, well, even before women had the vote, this is the thing that's so fascinating about reading Ernest Belfort Bax. I'm on my Bax kick again. But he was writing in the late 19th century. The Fraud of Feminism is published in 1913. Women don't have the vote at that time. And he makes the exact same point that you've just been making, that any initiative, any public conversation, any policy that can be seen to benefit women, whether it does or not, is going to be enthusiastically endorsed by the vast majority of men, even though there was no direct political incentive at that time to do so. There were all sorts of indirect political and other kinds of incentives, obviously. So this has been going on for who knows how many centuries. And now
the gynocentrism rising out of chivalry, right? Into a time when the women don't need the protection.
Exactly. Exactly.
But men need to start saying no. We can't. Women do too. I think everybody needs to start saying no to the insanity of feminism. It's just gotten so out of hand that it's embarrassingly obvious how twisted these people are. But
you
getting
know,
back to the gender study thing,
men are enthusiastically pushing it. And so a man who says no now is a man who is risking his career and his reputation.
but that's what it takes. That's what it takes.
That's what it takes.
It's the right thing to do, and to not set the boundaries and to not call out the insanity is a failure. I think, especially, it's a failure in humanity, but it is especially a failure in masculinity. That's where our masculinity is toxic, is that we're not saying no to women, to feminist women in particular. We're not setting healthy boundaries. That's what healthy masculinity should do, and healthy fatherhood is to set healthy boundaries. And sometimes if you've got a precocious child, you've got to be pretty tough about setting those boundaries, and it's not an easy job. Men have failed in that job.
Men have to be able to stand up. Yeah, they have to stand up for themselves against women. They have to stand up for other men. They have to stop listening to women saying things like, he harassed me. He has to be fired from his job. They have to stop being willing to do women's bidding against other men. But of course, women have to stand up too. I mean, I was having this conversation with people under the video, the double standards video.
Are you there? I think
we're come to understand the silence. Sorry, did you lose me?
A little bit.
Sorry. Well, anyway, I was just saying I had this conversation with people under the double standards video that it's really difficult to explain both the passivity and the complicity of men and the silence of most women. Where are the non-feminist majority of women? I speak to women, quite often who, when we talk about feminism, they say, yeah, that's lousy. Yeah, I feel really bad for the guys who have to put up with that crap. Yeah, it's nonsense. So, there are women out there who are not driven by resentment against men and who don't buy the feminist ideology at all. But how to activate those people? That's the question.
Yeah, I think there's a failure of adulthood too, because as a healthy adult, both male and female need to be able to set healthy boundaries. And nobody's calling out the insanity of feminism. Some of the insanity is absolutely obvious. It doesn't take any deep analysis to just say, no, look, that is crazy, and we're not going to put up with this. But I want to respond to this question of this vision here. I think I think we need to call out the insanity, and we have to keep saying no. And it's going to take. Men are going to lose jobs. Men are going to face big pushback. I remember seeing this guy who was pushing back against a group of feminists in Argentina, and they were just all over him like a mob, and he was just standing there. Yeah. Too freaking bad. Okay, I'm doing my thing. You're going to have to deal with it, and that is someday it's going to have to take some tough. It's not going to be easy. And also, when it comes to gender studies in universities, gender studies is demonstrably anti-intellectual. That's the weak point of it. There's no way that we should tolerate an anti-intellectual, deceitful, lying, manipulative course of study in a university system.
It's too late though, Steve. It is too late. We could, at this point now, we could end gender studies and it absolutely would not be enough, because the gender studies ideology, the ideology not only of feminism, but of social justice in general, about a whole bunch of subjects, anti-colonialism, anti-racism, toxic whiteness, all those kinds of things, ableism, there are all sorts of queer studies that has penetrated into pretty well all disciplines, including even the hard sciences now. I've got a script ready to go about the diversity statement and the move that departments of physics, of biochemistry, of engineering.
Are you there? I think you just broke up.
They don't hire anyone. Oh, sorry about that. That's too bad. Well, just
Just lost a little bit of it. That's okay.
Anyway, that basically it's everywhere now. It's everywhere. It's throughout all of the departments of the university, and there is a move now to make sure that no one who has not bought into social justice ideology is hired at all.
Yeah, no, I agree. I don't think I'm not saying the battle's winnable, but I think that little voice against the army still has to speak up. And this is the moment of heroism needed.
Yeah.
It is the battle. And
it doesn't
I think
feel like heroism.
The battle
when you
must
lose
be
your
engaged,
job.
even if it seems overwhelming. That's what I'm saying.
Well, I agree
Because
with
it's
you.
the right thing to do. You're going to lose. Okay, here it is.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's hard when you lose when you're an individual, though. I think it's different if you have an army. Even if you're going into battle knowing that the chances are you're all going to be slaughtered, that's horrifying, terrifying. But to be an individual and to know that you're likely going to lose your job and you have people depending on you, you have children, and to know that it's not even going to matter. That's the
Janice,
thing.
okay, let's just send a message out to these people going down that career line. You left the university and you couldn't wait to get out. Mm-hmm. The reason I'm getting from that is that it's soul destroyingly anti-intellectual that it will ruin you from the inside by being part of this enormous cultural lie. You have to be really stupid not to realize that you're participating in a deception. And you realize that you're participating in deception. And that's why you had that, I think, why you felt that you just could not operate in that environment anymore. Mm-hmm. Am I right on that?
Mm-hmm. But of course, one could say, well, but then my leaving does nothing to weaken the institution. In fact, it strengthens it. I will be replaced eventually by a true believer. So how did I help things by leaving? I mean, and that's the thing. And I don't mean to discourage anyone from taking their stand and from speaking the truth and being a voice of resistance, because that's obviously what we need. But one cannot overstate.
So many examples of individuals that turned an entire culture on its end because that one individual stood up. There was a famous one in England who was imprisoned, an intellectual. I can't remember his name now. An author.
Certainly, you can find examples throughout history of individuals.
That's
Jesus had 12 disciples. They changed, the world in the most radical possible way. So it isn't that it isn't
that's
impossible.
The time we're living in. That's what I'm trying to say is that is what the kind of people that are going to change it today. They're going to risk everything. They're going to have to risk everything.
Disciples died, in horrific ways and were tortured, etc. So, so that it's heroism really is required. One cannot possibly overstate what a difficult task it is, but also one can't overstate how important it is.
Yeah.
Well,
on that we got note, really into that topic.
Yeah. So
sorry. Pushing it kind of hard on there, but it is passionate theme, and
I every once in a while I do wonder if maybe I think about these things so much that
we've lost
them. And many people are going about their lives and just and they haven't been personally touched by the lies, but I think still one has to take one stand, because ultimately the direction that we're going in our society can't last. You cannot create a class of people that it is okay for them to be hated and ground under and treated unjustly, passed over for jobs, passed over for promotion, unjustly imprisoned, blamed for everything, that their lives are so tenuous that their reputations can be destroyed by a single accusation with no evidence, that they can have their very children taken away from them.
Well, there's endless things. There's endless things. I mean, they're stacking all these things up for sure. But here's the thing, Janice. This is a just cause, and in a sense, that is that can be an inspiring thing for men out there who are thinking like, how should you spend your life? What is worth working on? This feminist cancer is destroying people right across the first world, and it will spread into the third world as well. And it's a lying, corrupt, deceitful, evil empire. Yes, lots of people who oppose it are going to be destroyed, but you at least have the peace of mind of knowing that you are able to speak the truth. You are able to live and leave your life with a clear conscience. That's worth a lot.
It is. But one has to be aware that what will come at you is not people saying, well, I can see that you are fighting for your cause, and I'm sorry, I disagree with you. You're going to be told that you're wrong in every way, and you're going to be told that you have the absolutely most despicable motives, that you're full of hatred and bitterness, that you're deluded, that you're
Gandhi
crazy.
faced those things.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I don't know. I mean, did he?
He had praise at home.
And
he had a lot of support at home.
A lot of people recognize the justice of his cause, even amongst those who opposed him. So, yeah, it is. I think it's a particularly difficult moment to be standing up for the truth, because the forces arrayed against the person who tries to speak the truth.
But what's the alternative, Janice?
Yeah, I know there isn't any. I guess, I mean, I feel that the one thing we do on our channel, for sure, is we offer an opportunity for people to see that they are not crazy, that things really are as bad and upside down and perverted as they seem to be. They really are. And you will be told that you're crazy if you try to speak on behalf of men and speak against feminist ideology. But you are not
well,
crazy.
I hope we're giving people some ammunition to defend themselves with these videos. And
and that's what I want to continue to do. And it is, I find it dispiriting work sometimes. Like I was just doing something the other day on the woman, her name was Cheryl Moody. Australians will probably know that name. She's a feminist activist in Australia. And she was the one who claimed that firefighters, those fighting the bushfires in Australia, will come home to abuse their wives. And that we know that at times of natural disaster, domestic violence gets worse. It's crueler and harsher. Women suffer more. And, she was denounced for that. She didn't get away with it, although she was never forced to apologize. And, her life is essentially unaffected by that horrific, hateful statement. There's so many things to be said about that, and I'm going to do a video about it pretty soon. But I started investigating what evidence there actually is for this notion. Let's put firefighters outside of the equation, but that domestic violence increases during times of natural disaster. The evidence is incredibly thin when you really look into those studies, and particularly the one about the bushfire case, the Black Saturday case that Cheryl Moody was referring to. There is no evidence for the equation she was drawing between natural disaster and family violence. You start reading all this stuff, like most people just don't have time to get into all these studies that have been done. There's hundreds, thousands of them perhaps, on various different topics that are cited over and over again until these things seem to be true. But when you actually start looking into them, so much of it is lies. And you really begin to sense that almost nothing that we read in the mainstream news can be trusted. Almost nothing at all. Anytime you learn anything in detail about any ideologically significant subject, you realize that it's been completely distorted. And you start to feel, well, you start to feel paranoid, for one thing, that you don't know what you can trust anymore. And I don't have time to look into every single issue that I read about. I'm trying to just do this one thing about feminism and its various claims. Even that, it's impossible to look into them all. And you feel this weight that there are so many lies, so many people profiting from these lies and furthering them and promoting them and allying with others in order to entrench them and to destroy anyone who tries to question them. And it's a pretty profound revelation.
I want to address this fellow here, Sean Tower 487. It just gives a very generous donation of $20. Thank you very much, Sean.
Thank you, Sean.
And I agree. I have mentioned many times that find yourself someplace outside of the eye of the storm. Canada is one of the eyes of the storm for sure.
Because I think it's for young men to think about. Yeah.
There are better places to live, in my opinion, and also it has a double benefit of starving the beast. If you have any retirement money, or if you can work, get your money from the internet or from within your country and live elsewhere, it helps to starve. Every little bit might help to starve the beast, you know.
Yeah.
And we also got another donation from Zeranks. Thank you very much, Zeranks, and $5 donation, very generous. And he's mentioning that MGTOW is snaking its way across the world and being discussed by West Africans on forums. I didn't know that. That's interesting. I know it's in Japan. They call them grass eaters, I think. It's the same concept of men who are foregoing a love life with women. And there's been several other very interesting comments. I wish I could get to them all, but I think, Janice, you're on a tight schedule here today, right? You need to get going. Is there anything you wanted to?
No, if you want to go back and look at some of the comments, that'd be great.
Oh, right now?
Sure. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. They skipped by fairly fast, so let me see if I can get to them here. Yeah, it wasn't implicating that MGTOW is snaked through. And okay, her before men. That's the Japanese one. Sorry, it's hard to get through these comments because they kind of flip on their own as new ones come in here.
Yeah.
I saw. There's quite a few. Somebody's mentioning that CBC and BBC are both, I think there's no argument there. They're both feminist organizations fairly deeply, would you say?
Well, I don't know of any mainstream news organ that doesn't lie.
Yeah. Yeah. And they're pretty dominated by feminism.
The Guardian is incredible. The BBC is almost unbelievable. Certainly CBC. The agenda is so overt. It's embarrassing. Yeah.
Well, why don't we? I can't. There's a lot of. Well, somebody says you can pause the chat. I'm not very good at this stuff. I'm sorry, guys. I've read several as good comments go by, and I just can't pick them up on the fly here very fast, I'm afraid.
I look forward to reading them
here
afterwards.
Title IX filings on campuses on behalf of men. Are they having any effect? You looked into this a little bit a while back, right, Janice?
I've looked into it a little bit. A friend of mine, Kursat Chris Pagot, has done extensive studies of this. I would strongly recommend anybody who wants to talk about Title IX to contact him. He's found basically, unfortunately, so far, men making Title IX complaints about the overt injustices and inequities on university and college campuses their complaints are simply not dealt with fairly. They're simply ignored, essentially. So that it's pretty dispiriting. Mark Perry, who's an amazing man who does incredible research. He's the author of the chart that was in that video. It was called "For Every 100 Girls and Women," and then he shows the situation of boys and men in relation to girls and women. So for things like mental health, physical health, incarceration, that kind of thing. He's done all sorts of statistical research into the specific disadvantages that boys and men face in North American society. And he's also done various Title IX, investigations and complaints. But it's very hard going because all the people who are tasked with adjudicating Title IX investigations are themselves SJW feminists. So they're not interested in real equality at all.
No. There was an interesting case that was settled recently. You remember that young fellow who stood there while he was accused by a Native American on the campus? I forget his name. He was a high school student.
Yeah, Covington High School. Yeah.
There you go. That they successfully settled against, was it MSNBC who spread that lie about him?
Yes, I think there were a number of broadcasters who pushed a really inverted narrative about their racism and their aggression in that encounter. I did see that there had been a settlement, but I didn't have a chance to read about it yet. So yeah, sometimes
says CNN was that one. CNN.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, CNN. They're a real trustworthy news source, aren't they?
Yeah. I mean, it's quite a time when you turn on the television news and every single story has an ideological slant. It's quite striking.
Okay, here's one big question. I don't know if you want to handle this one at the last minute, huh? No.
What's this?
Someone's questioning the need for formal liberal arts courses at all anymore.
Wow, that's a great question. With the internet, it is possible to educate oneself to a certain extent, although I really strongly believe that the opportunity to discuss great works of literature with an expert in an intimate setting like a university classroom, and to have an intensive 3 or 4 year program of study, it's not something I could ever do on my own. I don't think. It's a wonderful opportunity, and I'd be really sad to think that we would simply abandon that. But that's a great question, very interesting. I mean, there are opportunities now to teach oneself that didn't exist even 15 years ago.
Yeah. Well, maybe there's an opportunity there to start up a new private university.
Well, certainly that's what Professor Peterson talked about, and we do need those. We absolutely do. I'd like a male-only university. I think that would be incredibly helpful for young men. And I'd like a...
How about in the Dominican Republic?
Yeah, sounds like a good idea. There we go.
A lot cheaper.
Sounds great.
I'll be your first student.
Okay, well.
Any other final comments, Janice?
Lots of other things that are worth talking about, but that's all for now, I think.
Well, thank you, viewers, for coming with us, and thank you, Janice, for being on again. We would love to stay on longer, but I'm afraid we're out of time. So, and thanks for the generous donations. So hopefully, folks, we'll have another one out for you. When do you think the next Fiamengo file will get out?
3 huge topics coming up. One, for me, I don't know if they're generally huge for people, but one, the mandatory diversity statements for science courses. I got a big script about that. Harvey Weinstein. I've been meaning to write something about him for months and months and months. His trial is starting next week, and I've got a script ready on that. And finally, the Australian bushfires and the research supposedly showing an increase in domestic violence after natural disasters. Got something on that. So
all 3 great topics. Thank you very much, Janice. And thank you, everyone, for staying with us. And
here's to a good 2020 for everybody.
A great 2020. Yes. Good night.
Night.